Hi, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Rules Lawyers, the show where we talk about what we do and don't like about the RPG world. And we do quick little reviews of books, rules as written. I am Trey, and this is my co host, mentor. Well, he does kind of everything, Colwyn the Conqueror.
Hello.
And just to briefly kind of give you a bit of who we are, I have been playing RPGs for the better part of 10 years. Started back in high school, as many of us did in the basements slash garages of our friends, drinking flat soda and regretting our life choices. Colwyn here will introduce himself shortly, but a little bit more about me. I love playing tabletop RPGs. I think we all do. That's kind of what we're here for. I have found that D&D doesn't scratch the itch all the time. And so we're hoping to use this podcast as a way to discuss the things that we find doesn't quite fit within fifth or other editions of, well, any game, and how we can try to find a way to make all of that happen. Colin, why don't you go ahead and take it from here, bud?
Yeah, so I've been playing games with Trey now for almost, 8, 9 years, give or
Yeah,
take?
about give or take. Yep.
Yeah. Off and on for about 8, 9 years. We've played various systems and games together. I have been running games since I was 18. So I discovered it after high school, first year in college. Um, and I started out with D&D, as I think most of us do. At that time, it was D&D 3.5, um, and I've played every iteration of Dungeons and Dragons ever since. But I have also played and mostly run other games like Call of Cthulhu, uh, anything in the Fantasy Flight Warhammer 40K games. Let's see, so many games, so many systems. Call of Cthulhu, Warhammer 40K,
You
World
so
of
you would say
Darkness.
would you say that if there was a game for a genre, you've probably at least run at least one of them?
If I haven't run it, I've probably played all of the major contenders, like Shadowrun, um, Cyberpunk, um,
Gotcha.
you name it, like Rifts. I mean, I've played everything from the 70s to today.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and speaking of today, like let's talk a little bit about fifth. I know fifth has now become 5.5. They've got the new rule system that came out.
Mm-hmm.
I have not had an opportunity to read this new rule system, so I can't really trash it all that much. But from what I have heard, it's been more of some minor tweakings of fifth and less of a full on new system. I think
Mm-hmm.
you've said you've read some of that. Is that
I
correct?
have. I have read some of it. There are some things that it's good at that they kind of tried to correct in fifth edition. Um, I wouldn't even go so far as to call it 5.5 so much as maybe 5.25. Again, they've they've tried to correct things. They've added things. They've taken away things. Um, it's been a very interesting experience. I've only glanced at the core books. Um, they've changed they've changed the lore of some things, which I find to be interesting in some cases.
Mhm.
Um, and they've changed some class features that I'm not sure I agree with, but hey, I can't, I, you know, I can't
Right. It's
control
their
it.
books.
Yeah,
They're the ones making it. They can do what they
it's
want
their
with
it's
it.
their
So,
intellectual product. They can do with it what they want.
so I think most of what we're going to be talking about hopefully won't come up into the things that they've changed. But on the off chance it has, we're just going to kind of keep fifth as the primary thing we're going to
Hmm.
focus on.
For today's
Why don't we
episode.
start by talking about yeah? Why don't we start talking about like the things that we do think OG Fifth is great for? Some of the things that we think that it does very well. Personally, for me, coming from 3.5 Pathfinder, having played some of the other I played in some 40K stuff with you, as
Mm-hmm.
well as some of the old World of Darkness stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I find fifth to be a fairly easy game to step into. Even with a brand new player, you can sit down and typically, as long as it's not a wizard, as long as you're not dealing with spell lists, you can knock out a character in like 10 minutes. Building a character really doesn't take a whole lot of time in fifth as much as it did in 3, 5, and some of the other games. But a lot of that also had to do with just like the sheer backlog of books you had to choose from in those games, that just like there's so much to nail down your character to try to get it just right, you know, just right. Whereas in fifth, you know, didn't really have those issues. It was very simple to kind of go, okay, I want to play a warrior. Okay, I want to play somebody who's a leader on a battlefield. So I'm going to pick the one that fits into that role. Boom, I'm done for till I hit level 20. I just write down this information that it gives me from there, and then whatever my DM gives me
Mm-hmm.
as the games progress.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that to go kind of piggyback off of your point there, D&D 5 point like it focuses largely on archetypes, um, and the styles of the characters. You have like primal characters, martial characters, and arcane/magic characters. They can all do the same things as other classes. Like you can have a rogue that does magic. You can have a fighter that does magic. But if you do that, you're not going to be as effective as you would be if you were just a straight fighter or a straight mage. Um, that's not necessarily a failing on the game. It's you trying to be more of a dynamic character. No problem there, um, in my opinion. What I really like about fifth edition is it created, or not created, but it integrated in the advantage disadvantage system. I really like the idea of being able to roll twice and take the higher for a success, or take the lower of a roll for a fail. If something like based on the scenario, like, oh gosh, I'm carrying a bunch of stuff and trying to climb up a mountain. You know, are you going to be able to do that with just a single die? Sure, you could in previous versions, and you
Mm-hmm.
still add it up. But with this one, it adds in that layer of suspense and dread of, oh gosh, I could fall and get seriously injured. That's just one example. I could mention numerous others, but hey, we're on a time schedule. Another thing that I really like is with fifth edition is that characters themselves can be pretty creative, um, with it, and the players can use their imaginations to help, you know, feed into it. You can do that with any game, though, for the most part. Any game setting and game system, for the most part.
So when we get to what we dislike, I think you're going to find that I'm actually going to disagree with
That's
you
fine,
on the creativity point.
and
But
that's
we'll
fine.
we'll get to that. We'll
Yeah,
get to that.
yeah. I don't think it does the best for creativity,
Sure,
but
sure.
I do say that it does well to introduce people into the creativity of role playing.
Oh, I agree. I also think that specifically what it does very well is high fantasy. I think high fantasy fifth edition is fantastic at.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you want to feel like you are powerful, fifth edition lets you feel powerful.
It's next to
I
impossible to die
always
in that game.
I always say that fifth edition feels like I'm playing fantasy superheroes, and that can be fantastic and a lot of fun. There's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely nothing wrong with that. Um, it's just not always the game that I'm looking for,
Right, right.
which I think, unless there's some other things that you wanted to talk about, I think this is a great point time for us to go ahead and transition into some of the cons that we have with it.
Well, just to kind of also add on to the fantasy superhero aspect of it. Um, considering what D&D itself is generally based on, Lord of the Rings, the sword and sorcery sources of the 70s, 80s, and somewhat of the 90s, Conan the Barbarian, the writings of Robert E. Howard, all of these things kind of lend itself into the D&D space. And there are other systems and games that are based around those, worlds and things. But again, you can be those heroes and or characters inspired by those heroes. And yeah, sure, D&D has its problems, which we should get into now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that one of the biggest things that we're gonna find is that a lot of the pros about fifth are also the cons. So, like we were talking about right now, right? That high fantasy, very heroic feel that you get from fifth edition is in fact one of its biggest detractors for both you and I. We typically like a darker fantasy game. We like gritty games, horror games. We like games where our characters feel like they're having to struggle and there is strife and the worlds are bleak and it is tough to live in. Not usually what I think you or I typically pick for our usual form of entertainment, but there's something about playing somebody who is having to struggle against the odds that is so empowering as a player. And I feel like I don't get that when I play fifth. I feel like I've already started at the end. I'm already so strong, especially once you hit third level and you get to pick that subclass and that kicks in. I feel almost unstoppable in most of my classes that I play.
Hmm. I'm gonna counter that. I'm gonna say that's a failing on your game master's part there, because if you're running a game that you're not feeling threatened by any stretch of the means, then there's no challenge. There's nothing there, and that really doesn't fall on you. It doesn't even really fall on the game necessarily. That falls on the way that the story is being told.
No, that's fair. I think a better way for me to try to phrase this so that way I can try to make it make a little bit more sense, get more to the point that I'm actually trying to reach here,
Mm-hmm.
is that fifth feels like a high fantasy game where we are going on an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like there's always that wind in the sails kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes any kind of sense. Whereas, like, if you, like, you know, I think I recently read one of the One Ring books just to kind of get a glancing at some of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like even the movies don't do a particularly good job of like showing it off. The world
Of Middle
that
Earth, yeah.
Tolkien in Middle Earth, that is a dark world. These are
Mm-hmm.
people struggling against what is essentially an apocalyptic event,
Mm-hmm.
an unstoppable force that will eventually crush down on top of them,
Yep.
and they struggle against all odds to what we hope is success. And but like they are struggling from the beginning, and it is that bleakness and that feeling of weakness that you know I want the strength that I feel in a character to be something that is earned and consistently challenged. I don't want it to be you are level 1, you are 4 spells deep, your cantrips can kill most things that you're going to have to deal with at around the area that you are. I have had multiple DMs tell me, because occasionally I play clerics, tell me that, hey, yeah, I was going to have to like double the amount of people that I was going to have to throw into this, but because you had something come up and couldn't make it, I got to basically go, oh, thank God, I don't have to factor in 3 times the HP pools for all of my heroes.
Yeah, that's true. That is an accurate statement there, because of how powerful certain classes are. Um, and one of the other things that I would again slightly counter that is, if we look at D&D as a setting unto itself, with the multiverse that 5th edition has, if you're going from the perspective of, say, Forgotten Realms, there
Sure.
are certain settings in Forgotten Realms where you can have this somewhat of a dark, oppressive setting. Baldur's Gate, in Descent into Avernus, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, in Waterdeep. There are things there that people don't necessarily play up, especially if what people want in D&D is an adventure story, or it's all based on what the players expect from the DM and how the DM comes about it or goes about it. Because not every player, like us, want a high adventure story or a dark, gritty, almost grim dark setting. You know,
So I do agree to a point, but what I think is important for us to kind of keep into context, though, is let's go ahead and play off of the example that you were talking about here. How there are these, you know, settings that have some of that kind of going,
mm-hmm,
but there's also right a lot of those come from the modules that people are
mm-hmm,
reading, and then that's typically how that comes out. Um, I remember when we started playing. Well, let me say when I started playing, I never wanted to play in Barovia.
and why
I
is that?
never wanted to actually have to deal with D&D Dracula. D&D Dracula was spooky as fuck. That shit was scary. I'm sorry.
You've
I
never
didn't want
played him
to
with
deal with it.
me.
Well, if I did, it would have been way worse.
Uh huh.
And it would have been, yeah. But in I'm talking 3.5, right?
Oh, Barovia in
So
3.5 was not nearly what Barovia was originally either.
sure, sure, but that, and we can get into that as we get into later
Mm-hmm.
games and things like that. But um, I had a lot of friends that played in, in that setting, and
Myself included.
all of, oh yeah, yourself included, and all of them talked about, just how at the bare minimum intimidating
Mm-hmm.
the threats in that area were.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know anybody that I've either heard from or talked to, or even some of the videos that I've watched on YouTube when I heard that the setting book was coming out. Or I shouldn't say the setting book because it's not really a setting book; it's a module, I believe.
Well, there is
Uh,
there is okay. So there's the initial I or Curse of Strahd book,
huh.
and then there is Van Richten's guide to
Guide to the thing, yeah.
Ravenloft
So,
or Barovia.
um,
Yeah.
specifically when it was the Curse of Strahd
Mm-hmm.
module, which I mean, I do like the fact they decided to go back and bring back some of those classic modules that people really really did love. Um,
Myself
one of
included.
the
Yep.
one of the big things that I heard from people was is like, wow, this is what everyone's been talking up.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't that scary. That guy wasn't that terrifying. That was he wasn't that strong. And part of that is probably people taking their already powerful characters and running through it. Some of that might also just be, DMs not doing a great job at playing up horror. Horror is tough to do in a tabletop setting. While you are very good at it, and that is something that is a point of pride for you to be able to be good at, let's be fair. It's tough to be good at
It is.
actually getting horror across in a setting. But I think that's one of the things that because fifth edition doesn't lend itself well to it, right? It doesn't really
No.
give you tools
No.
to empower the DM to be able to do that. It's one of its downsides. Like I said, it's high fantasy. It's intended for people to feel strong and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are in situations or you create a world where the players are intended to feel weak or feel like they must struggle in that kind of way, you're you're almost fighting the system.
Mm-hmm.
Instead
Mm-hmm.
of playing to the strengths of it, you're fighting it in a way. Um, and I think anytime you have to fight the system you're playing in, that's already like gonna make things that much harder for both you and your players to kind of get on board with what exactly is going on the same page.
Yeah. So within running, because I've run several of the modules that Fifth
Mm.
Edition had, including the first one, which the first one was, which is Tyranny of Dragons, is what it eventually became known as. Um, it was poorly organized and written, and then whenever they combined Horde of the Dragon Queen with the Rise of Tiamat, it became just more of a slog than it did really more of a game that you could go through and everything. It became more grindy. With something like Curse of Strahd, because you had the elements of bringing in characters from other dimensions with the mists, you could bring in already kind of powerful creatures that were, if you will, alien to Barovia. Um, Now, that was the game was set up to do that. The issue becomes, how do you then scare these characters within the confines of the module? You know, you have to look at it from, okay, I have a fire genasi that that can conjure flames, and some of these creatures are like water based, elementals or something like that, and the fire genasi will just steam them to death, basically. Um, what I see what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with you on the module for Curse of Strahd had a lot of problems. A lot of the problems stemmed with the the way that it was written wasn't meant for horror players. It was meant for high fantasy players. For people like me that focus a lot on gothic horror, like Strahd is, like Dracula is, we looked at it and all we see is a toolbox where we can put in wonderful things and make the story better. We can add in layers of dread that aren't there by adding um, ambient threats or something that may make them feel like, oh crap, there's something that's down this alley or in this swamp that's going to come and eat me. That is the
Uh,
problem with the Curse of Strahd. Is it's also very linear. It doesn't leave a lot of room for exploration in one of the most like explorable worlds of D&D.
well, no, I think that's entirely all fair assessments. Um, I think another thing for me that like was a big draw against fifth, coming from the fact that I played 3.5 and
Mm-hmm.
then going into Pathfinder and all the other systems that I played before fifth really kind of came
Mm-hmm.
out. I remember fifth came out, and I think as you can recall, I pushed every single group I was in. I was like, let's move to fifth.
Mm-hmm.
We can create
I remember.
characters easy.
Yeah.
The system is super fun. Like it's so rules light by comparison. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to own an entire library to be able to play the game.
Yeah.
Granted, that was when the game first came out. Now we're a little ways into it. There's a lot of books now, but
10 years later.
even yeah, even by today's standards, I still
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't necessarily consider the amount of books you need to play fifth that much. Like,
No.
sure, you've got Xanathar's Guide, and you've got a couple other ones that have like options for players, which of course is typically what I care more about.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big things that really found both is a pro and a con, as we were talking about earlier, is it's very archetypal. right?
Mm-hmm.
You pick your class, then you pick a subclass, and you kind of just stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
Multiclassing is an optional rule in fifth. It is not something that is available for players if the DM does not want it to be.
Correct.
And while I think that that's a smart choice,
It's also
one of the
very hard
big
to do. Yeah.
one of the big things that fifth leaves in there, I kind of wish they had taken away, but they left in there was remnants of the old feat system from previous editions.
Mm-hmm.
The old feat system was a very cool system. Also, I believe feats were optional, I believe, as
They were.
well. But it, I don't know anybody that played with them without them. So I typically include them. And one of the big things about fifth is because I think because the feat system was considered to be optional, you ended up with feats that were remnants of old games that ended up going nowhere because they just didn't put any effort into it. One of the things that for me was always fun, and I think everybody does at some point, is building a two-weapon fighter or a two-weapon rogue or a two-weapon ranger,
Mm-hmm.
somebody who runs in with two swords or daggers or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing being, doing that. And there's a ton of options and previous editions that allow you to really lean into that
Mm-hmm.
as your main thing. In fifth edition, they have a feat that lets you have a secondary weapon. You get one extra attack a round, with some, I believe, with some negatives. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
looked at the book in a while, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what those negatives are. But they also have another one in there that I think it's called Polearm Master. I
Yep.
might have the name on that wrong. And it does the same thing if you have a pole arm,
Yeah.
except now you're doing it with a reach weapon.
Yeah. Polearm Master and Great Weapon Master are the other two in that
It
option.
it might be Great Weapon Master that I'm thinking of, but one of them essentially lets you use a large weapon with reach. You get a second attack with it because you're striking with the back end of it.
Mm-hmm.
The negatives are way less, and then on top of that, it has even more stuff that it gives you,
Yeah.
and it's for the same efficiency cost as the two weapon fighting one. And the two weapon fighting one doesn't like open up a line where, oh well, now, if you have this plus this other thing, like if you took the two weapon fighting option when you hit a level to pick a fighting style, that it does extra stuff. No, it just makes two weapon fighting not terrible. It doesn't make it good. It doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
it great. Fighters get like four or five extra attacks by level 20, and
Mm-hmm.
that can change depending on what subclasses you go into,
Mm-hmm.
because like, Echo Fighter, which was later I believe considered canon,
Mm-hmm.
um like they get an extra attack because their clone can attack. So you end up with this whole thing where it's like, okay, cool, but like if I have an extra attack, I should be getting like, it used to be if you had that many attacks in a round with two weapon fighting, it would be like, cool, I've got six on my main hand weapon, I have five on my offhand weapon,
Mm-hmm.
and each progressive attack gets worse, right?
Yeah.
So that used to be kind of like the way that worked, and that was kind of the big thing, right? I want
Mm-hmm.
to throw a lot of my funny math rock, and hopefully I get a lot of hits, and hopefully those hits add up to a lot of damage, and that felt good and fun, and it felt like you had a purpose in doing that option. And in games where you don't have a lot of action economy, where that extra attack, that can really be a big deal. But in fifth, the action economy gets crazy, not fairly quickly, but it does start to get out of hand by the time you get to like 10th to 15th level within there. Yeah, we're talking about the later half, but I've never played a game where I didn't at least get to 15th level. So if I'm playing a fighter and I've already got like three attacks plus my action surge plus all these other things, and it's like, you know, this taking this one feat that makes me worse at my one thing, which is attacking, and what to get one extra attack really seemed like a waste of time. It would have been one thing if it led into like a feat tree or something that you could play off of. And maybe there's something I don't know about that they've done, but um,
Well, I mean, so that's the problem with feats in fifth edition. So feats with fifth edition were actually carried over not from 3.5.
it's from fourth, right?
Correct. Like the same kind of style of it was done in fourth, because fourth edition thought that the feats needed to overhauling from 3.5 because 3.5 you had literal libraries of feats,
Oh yeah,
and
it was
and
great.
you were correct in that they had trees and stuff, or what we would call prerequisites, which they kind of had a little bit of in fourth edition, and then gradually with everything that's come out in fifth edition, you finally kind of have it. Whereas within fifth edition, you would, in your case, you could start out with like power attack and then build up to cleave and greater cleave and improved cleave and all of these other things, but you had to build up to that in your levels and in your stats. With fifth edition, all you really have to worry about is having a certain. I believe you just need to have a certain um, attribute be at a certain level, like strength being 13, I believe, for power attack.
Right, yeah, and they're not particularly difficult to achieve
No, they're
either.
not.
As long as it's something you were intending to do with your character, you were probably hit it at level one,
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah. But also within that, see, in previous editions of D&D, you would have feats at every other level. Fifth edition, the only one that does that, I believe, is fighter. Um,
Um,
I
I
believe
would have to double check that. I know that you could exchange your
your ability
up
improvement at
your
four level
ability
four.
improvement for yeah, your ability improvements
Yes,
for feats, and I believe the fighter has the most ability improvements. I think
correct.
is that what that's
Well,
typically
everybody
what they
has
say.
one. Everybody has an ability score improvement every four levels. So the option to do it was there to do either
Hmm.
a feat or improve your abilities. So most people, depending on what they were playing in, would choose to do a feat, depending again how you're playing.
Mm.
But a lot of players and a lot of DMs would kind of choose to do both, to build stronger characters because they thought that the characters were weaker for some reason in 5th edition, because a lot of the class features weren't as powerful in previous editions depending on classes, especially rangers in 5th edition. um,
Yeah, Rangers really did get the shaft in fifth.
yeah,
Yet
rangers
yet
and
another
paladins.
thing, they did try to fix. I thought Paladins felt pretty strong from the beginning. I liked the aura effects.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't feel like maybe they weren't the strongest class in the game, but they certainly didn't feel weak. You might have to take like a level in fighter and then go there, but like at least Paladin felt strong. I liked the oath system in five. I
Mm-hmm.
liked the aspect they were trying to separate it from it being more about it being the chivalrous knight type character instead of this holy warrior character, which they kind of always had in the way that they did the cleric. So
Mm-hmm.
like well, I don't think that was what clerics were ever intended to be. That's what they kind of evolved into
Yes.
over time with D&D.
Mm-hmm.
And so them choosing to say, "Hey, why do we have two of these options here? Let's try to make this more of a holy knight instead of this like, you know, this crusader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making it more along that line, which is I think what a paladin should feel more like anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I think they nailed it on that personally. Um what I definitely do not like, though, in while we're talking about classes and the balance of that, is like you're talking about here. It felt like they were either afraid to give certain classes and subclasses power, or they didn't really know what to do with them. And so
Mm-hmm.
they gave them to the players half baked, and they weren't really finished or ready to be sent out. I think for me, the biggest example of this is Kinsei Monk.
Mm-hmm.
Kinsei Monk being the whole thing of you want to play a monk that uses a weapon. Okay, cool. Here's your monk who can use a weapon. But the entirety of the class is just let's take the stuff you get as generic monk, apply it to the weapon that you're using. Your weapon can't be magical or anything because, hey, guess what? You're applying that as yourself because
Mm-hmm.
you're becoming one with your weapon. And a lot of the problem with that is like that really diminishes, in my opinion, the whole point. And then on top of all of this, my skills, like I'm not getting to flurry of blades with my weapon or anything cool like that. Actually, I think you could. But one of the big things was like, oh, did you hit with your sword? Cool. You get to kick the guy
Yeah. Yeah.
as a free action.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, like that's neat, I guess. But in practice, the Kensei feels really bad to play. It's very unintuitive. It doesn't feel well to play at all. The other, it just feels weak. And I understand that part of that's because they were like, well, listen, we've already got a rogue, we've already got a fighter, we've already got this fucking poop bag that we're getting yelled at for ranger. And if we give the monk something that makes it a martial weapon class that makes it better than the current state of the ranger, then like we're really gonna have a problem because people love ranger.
Mm-hmm.
But why give me the option at all? Just like don't give it to me at all because I'd much rather you not give me a tool than give me a crappy tool. I'd rather not know something ever existed than get the worst version of it. Because now I want to use it, but I can't because it's so bad and I fall so far behind everyone else. And that was the problem that I ran into with that in particular class. And I've heard that I never really played Ranger, but I heard there was a problem with Ranger really early on.
There was.
And that's
Yeah.
why the subclasses for Rangers ended up coming out and they were some of the best in the game. But it's because the core structure that it was attached to was so weak that it had to be that much stronger to make up for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself is kind of the problem. Felt like fifth, while better balanced across classes than some of the other editions. Um, at the end of the day, it's still Wizard hit level 15, Wizard's an unstoppable monster. Sorcerer hit level 15, Sorcerer's an unstoppable monster. Like sure, the in the earlier editions, if you were a wizard or a sorcerer or one of the major spellcasting classes, you were weak. Somebody looked at you funny and you exploded. And that was kind of the whole shtick was is that you were an investment for the game to go long, for the
Mm-hmm.
story to progress for a while, and then you got to have the tools that you needed to be able to be powerful and to have that power. And
It
because
got flipped on its head.
you're
Yeah.
yeah, it really felt like wizards were okay from the beginning and then just got better. And sorcerers were okay from the beginning and they continued to get better. Whereas like fighters feel more consistently strong throughout instead of like tapering off.
Mm-hmm.
Barbarians same way. Rogues actually don't feel useless in some games because I remember the first game I ever played, I built a rogue. My stat roll was shit, but I kept it anyways. And then my DM did not tell me that it was an undead campaign. He did not mention that this is an undead campaign. And back in the day, it used to be that you could not backstab undead because they didn't really have a weak point for you to stab. If you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
stab a zombie in the kidney, that doesn't really do anything. I never liked that because, like, they still have weak points.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mean to tell me that if you looked at something shambling around, you couldn't figure out that, like, hey, where I am stabbing this dead creature I already know exists. You mean to tell me I can't find the spot to stab it the best?
Well, okay, so there's somewhat of a reason for that, um, and the reason that you couldn't backstab undead creatures or whatever you want to call it in that way is that lore was already known that you generally can't kill zombies in such a way as that, you know. Um, and generally speaking, because D&D is also a game based primarily on amount of hit points, in as opposed to, oh hey, I hit it in the head and it just dies. I managed to break its skull open and you know destroy the brain somehow, or destroy the brain stem. It dies. That was the logic there, because a lot of people would just be like, I'm just gonna hit it in the head. You know, that was the
Mm.
whole reason why they were like, you can't backstab undead, or you can't backstab specifically zombies, because
Yeah,
you would just sneak up behind them and bam, brain them. That was the
yeah, it
idea,
was
because at the time, what was one of the most popular shows that was on TV at the time?
Walking Dead. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Well,
we already
and
knew that
well,
from
uh,
Romero's ideas and stuff.
I don't remember. See, I don't think Walking Dead was around when 3.5 popped off.
It
That I can
wasn't.
think of.
It wasn't. But we had
But the
already had the
concept was already
Romero.
there.
Yeah, we'd already had
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
concepts of
I gotcha.
from Romero with Night of
Mm,
the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead. All of
mm.
those had been around and were largely accepted within their own
Sure. I mean, it feels
lore.
like lazy writing to me, but I also understand that, like, when you've got 10,000 things you need to write and you've got a
Yeah,
deadline, yeah, I get it.
yeah.
But at the same time, um, yeah, that was kind of like my introduction to Rogue was, hey, here's this class that's super cool and does all these neat things. By the way, your stats you roll are garbage, and also your big thing that's like the cool thing that you wanted to do, the reason why you picked it, um, you don't get to use that. And that
Oh,
was like,
yeah,
oh,
sneak
okay.
attack. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, sneak attack. So, sneak attack, and I believe the two that you couldn't use it against for sure were um, zombies and skeletons. I don't know if you could use it against mummies, but I never fought a mummy. So,
Mummies are, oh,
as
they're
a
awful in
rogue,
fifth
I never
edition.
fought a
Yeah.
mummy as a rogue
Hmm.
specifically. I have dealt with mummies as other classes, but I've never fought a mummy as a rogue.
Yeah, I think you did in one of my
Uh,
games. Yeah.
I don't think I played a rogue in any of your
Oh
games.
no, I
Maybe
meant
I did.
like a mummy. You've dealt with a mummy in one of my
Oh,
games.
yeah, I've fought a few mummies,
Yeah.
but yeah, mummies suck.
Hmm. But to answer that also, I think that that skeletons also have resistance against
I think
piercing
bludgeon. It's
and
yeah,
slashing.
it's
No, no,
piercing
they
and
don't. It's
bludgeoning.
it's bludgeoning that they don't have
Well,
that.
yeah, no, that's what I was gonna say. Is like
Yeah.
bludgeoning is what you were supposed to use against it because the
Hmm.
concept is that you're breaking their bones, and so
Yep.
they obviously, if they don't have anything else, they can't use it. Which
Yeah.
when it's a creature made of bone, that makes sense.
Hmm.
The logic there tracked.
Yeah.
The no sneaky tacky thing never tracked with me because like I was like, you mean to tell me I can't fucking hamstring somebody? I mean, okay, you're not hamstringing a skeleton, but
Right.
like you mean to tell me I can't hamstring a zombie and now it's gonna like at least walk slower?
So the
You
idea
know,
behind sneak attack within fifth edition is a
because
problem that
fifth doesn't have these issues. Fifth they work fine.
no fifth the fifth has with D&D especially, but fifth edition really has the problem with what's known as points economy.
Mm.
Um, since you can't sneak attack a rogue, or as you can't sneak attack a zombie or something,
No, you can sneak attack zombies in fifth.
right?
They
But
took all that out. Yeah.
yeah, and I somewhat don't. I mean, I somewhat agree with the whole sneaking attack on that, but sneak attack initially is just extra damage. If you now, but
Yeah.
see, that's the other thing is if you're saying I'm specifically sneaking attack or sneak attacking this area. That stops being a sneak attack and becomes a called shot if you go by the books as written. You just get
Gotcha.
to add your sneak attack damage to it, and
Yeah.
then you have to roll for your called shot, and then add your sneak attack damage to it.
Oh.
But to just say, I'm just going to go up there and sneak attack it, okay, cool. You get to add your extra damage to it. What's that face
Uh,
for?
I don't. I was like, I don't remember reading that, but I'll take your word on it because it's been a minute since I looked at the books. I'll
Because,
take your word on it.
well, so called shot in D&D is next to impossible. Like you can do it.
Well, I was because like I don't remember college shot rules being in fifth. I
There aren't.
remember them being in. I remember them being in third. I remember them being in.
They're not in the player's handbook in 5th edition. They're in the DMG. And in the DMG,
Ah, okay,
they
okay,
say,
yeah.
hey, if they're doing a
That
called
book I
shot,
never
they do
read.
it with
Gotcha.
disadvantage.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to make them do it with
Oh well, if it's with
disadvantage.
disadvantage, then
Yeah,
you can't get sneak attack damage anyways because you have to have advantage. On,
right.
yeah, gotcha. Okay.
So
Yeah,
that's the reason
that
why I'm
was actually
saying,
one thing that I did like
yeah.
in fifth is the advantage system. Right, I
Hmm.
actually do think the advantage system is one of the more creative ways to encourage players to work together,
Hmm.
but also to have cool and fun ways for you to interact. And a lot of other games do this narrative kind of explanation baked in as the main part of the rule set. So the fact that they tried to make fifth a more narrative style game, I don't hate it.
Hmm.
But the issue that I have with it is because it is so high fantasy in design and it is so strong on that high fantasy as far as the stats that players get and all of that stuff. And also, and I think you can even agree to this, monsters feel weaker and lackluster in
Yes,
fifth.
yes.
Dragons feel lackluster in fifth. I have not played an RPG where numbers advantage is so highly impactful as in fifth. I am
True.
more scared of 50 goblins than I am one dragon.
Yes, because
Because
it's easy to get overwhelmed in 5th edition. Yes.
because in fifth, if I have 50 goblins on top of me, I'm gonna die.
Hmm.
Even if they are like little nobody creatures and my DM is still like not making them being creative. He's just like, nah, dude, you're just in a box with 50 goblins. Like, I've got to deal with that. I'm at disad every time I attack. They all have advantage when they attack. There's 50 of them. Some of them are gonna crit. It's gonna happen.
I mean,
I will inevitably
I've
die.
TPK'd parties in 5th edition with giant rats or with rats.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and
But dragons compared to other editions just felt really weak. Don't get me wrong. Legendary actions are a cool concept. And I think that that was part of what made some monsters feel fun to fight.
mhm.
But I want to feel like I am going against an overwhelming force that I need to struggle against, not like I am a not like this is some kind of like super high fantasy Chinese martial arts thing where I'm gonna use my chi to fly as I fight against a dragon.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Like, and that's what I more felt like in fifth is that like I am on par with these creatures, but the description of these creatures is that they should be annihilating me with entire cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how are they ever supposed to do that when like a level 8 warrior and his two buddies that drink beer at the local pub on a Friday night can just roll out and fucking smack that guy in the face in 4 rounds? And I'm exaggerating a bit for to get my point across here, but like that's how it felt like fighting against some of these creatures. And yeah, you could give anything legendary action, I guess. But the point is that legendary actions shouldn't be a way to counteract the numbers advantages that players have. It should be a way for you to give creatures a limited pool of things that they can do that are really unique and powerful. So that way, when DMs are reading that, they understand that there's this limited pool of resources, and this should not be something that you're trying to abuse every single round. In my own personal opinion, that's what I would have liked to have seen them do. It seemed like it ended up being this other tool instead.
So yes, you are correct in that. And one of the so from from my perspective, you're seeing it from a perspective of why is this, you know, terrible mythical level dragon being destroyed by this one clerical dude and a couple of mooks from the local pub, right?
Yeah,
You know, looking at it from that perspective, okay, cool. That's poor world building.
I do agree, but I
And
think more of what I'm getting at is that that is the world building that D&D has created itself into. It, at least earlier on, it created itself into these like what's the term I'm looking for? Not loophole. Um when you look at like a story but there's obvious like failings in logic.
yeah, suspension
I
of
can't remember
disbelief.
the term. No, there's a term for it. It's fine. We're doing this live, so I can't exactly
Right.
Google it nor. But part of the thing that like is the stats and the tools given to creatures don't align with the descriptions of those creatures as well. And that's more of where my issue kind of comes in the line is I want to believe my DM when he starts telling me, "Oh, look at this fantastic mythical being." Or if I read the monster manual as a player and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, dragons are so cool." And then you fight one and you're like, don't get me wrong, you're like level 8 or 10 or whatever. And chances are your DM's probably giving you like a level every other session. Um, because like that's I guess apparently standard. And
Sometimes,
so
yeah.
then you're sitting there and you're just like, wow, that's a dragon. Neat, I guess. And like yes, you can fix a lot of the issues that I have by simply throwing higher level creatures that attack on other aspects. But the thing is that that's not really what D&D wants you to do. D&D wants you to feel like you're able to take on this. Look at this thing that you were able to fight. Look at how amazing it was. Look at how cool the combat was. You were able to go toe to toe with this fantastic mythical being. But what I think it ends up failing to do is make the creatures feel mythical and powerful. That's more of what I've seen. That's a failing on my, and I understand DM can make or fix that a lot,
Yeah.
but it's more of like I can't speak on the DM side of things. I can only speak on what I have seen and dealt with as a player, but also from what I have interpreted from what I've read of the books. And that's kind of a big thing for me is how am I supposed to feel like these creatures are powerful when I never they the only thing that's telling me that they're powerful is the description.
Mm-hmm.
There's not anything particularly powerful that they're doing, in my opinion,
So,
compared to previous editions where they had a lot
yeah.
more stuff that they could do.
Yeah. So with with 5th edition, you have what I tend to refer to as the balance of averages.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Um, because in 5th edition, it even says so in the player's handbook and somewhat in the DMG, is you're almost expected to run damage and run like it's mostly run damage and hit points based on an average roll. It's basically limiting the amount of dice that you roll to save time. So, you say, I'm going to swing my sword at this guy. I hit him. Okay, cool. What's your strength modifier? Okay, it's +2. All right. So you hit him. The average sword the average damage that your sword can do, because it's a D8, is like 3 or 4. You know, so you do a total of 6 damage to him every time you hit him. You know, and
Right.
within that, the monsters themselves have an average level of hit points that they have too, that you're expected to run with, because you're supposed to allow combat to last 2 to 3 rounds depending on the level of the monster and the level of the party. That's explained more in the DMG than it is in the
Mm.
player's handbook. I personally disagree with that.
Yeah, I think combat should be like closer to 5, even 7 rounds against a
Yes.
rather powerful being, because this should be a fight. This should be a slog. Your player should feel low on resources by the end of it. Somebody should have been downed at least once or twice. Granted, these are not necessarily like things that I think should be hard or fast rules, but like, like, don't get me wrong. If a player comes up with a creative plan and like somehow traps a dragon underneath of
Mm-hmm.
like a collapsing bridge, fuck yeah, reward the shit out of that. But like, as far as what the tools the books give you to work with, I like you're saying, everything is supposed to be wrapped up relatively quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for a combat
To
game to
streamline it. Yeah.
essentially be designed to get combat over with quickly, I kind of hate that, cuz like, I'm going to be real with you. D&D, one of the great things about D&D is its combat system. That's what I've always loved D&D for, because the fact that you can modify the way you can interact with combat, the tools that you have to be able to do different things, the feat systems for previous editions, all of these things from previous editions. Fourth excluded. I never played fourth. I loved.
Mm-hmm.
I got into fifth. Fifth was fun because it was that streamlined and it was quick and
Mm-hmm.
snappy and you
Mm-hmm.
could go quick. And there was a lot of cool stuff you could do because all these classes had these unique subclasses. Problem is you play 5, 7, 10 campaigns, you make 20 plus characters, they start to feel a lot less unique really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Obvious few exceptions are going to be most of the casters, because spells give you a ton of like room for
Yeah.
creativity.
Dynamic. Yeah.
Um, and then specifically outside of that, even though it is technically a caster, was Warlock. Warlock, every single level you make in Warlock, you are making a decision on
Yeah.
what the character is doing. And as far as I'm concerned, the Warlock modification list that they have, that's what the feat system should have been for
Yeah.
everybody.
Agreed. Absolutely. Most
Um,
people, and see, that's the thing, most people play warlocks in 5th edition by and
why
far.
wouldn't you just do
Exactly.
whatever you want?
It
Oh, you want to play a fighter, play a
bothers
warlock.
me.
Oh, you want to do this, do that, do this,
Yeah.
do that. Well, the other thing is that like warlock also has a narrative hook built in.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you something to do immediately. Why are you this? What is this thing? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so much you can do, right? So like one that I think is the one that everybody usually picks, especially if they're trying to do any kind of melee combat, is the one that's like the the dusk blade, I believe is what it's
Mm-hmm.
called.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, you have this weapon
Tome of
created
the
by an
Blade. Yeah.
otherworldly being. Yeah. And like, okay, that could be really cool. That could be the weapon of an ancient warrior whose soul has been trapped inside of it or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's any number of things that could be, and has some narrative interesting things that you can do with it, which I like a lot. Some of the other classes I think lack some of that creativity.
It drives me crazy because I I like to try to do that for every class too, but I have to do it as the DM.
Yeah.
It's not built into the game.
Well, and
That's
you want every
okay.
character to be able to feel unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important thing is when I go to make a character, I want to know that if we all sit down and we all build dwarf barbarians,
Mm-hmm.
that at the very least we can all feel like we are playing different characters to some degree. I think that fifth makes you feel like that the first time you do it. I think if you do it any more than that one time, it fails miserably just because of the nature of archetype based systems
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that without a fully fleshed out feat system like what we had in 3 and 3.5,
Mm-hmm.
um, fully fleshed out might be the wrong word. It was a bit complex for
Yeah.
needlessly complex.
Yeah.
But without the tools outside of the class to have creative control on the page for your character, it really deeply impacts your ability to feel like you have a wholly unique character.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the things that I think fifth fails at. Now, once again, fifth is a high fantasy game. It's fine for it to fail at those things
Mm-hmm.
because you're wanting to play an all powerful wizard, a warlock who has sold his soul to whatever for immense power, a barbarian who is shirtless and muscly and, makes me want to call him daddy. What were we talking about? I've forgotten. Anyways, um, all joking aside, fifth is a fantastic game. I to this day love fifth edition. I don't play it very often anymore because of the fact that one, it is so geared towards high fantasy, which has just not been my vibe for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And two, I feel like it just doesn't give me the tools to be creative as a player in the way that I want. I just don't see an interest in it. It's like McDonald's. I'm not going out of my way to stop at a McDonald's, but if I'm on a road trip and McDonald's is there, I'm gonna pull over and get a fucking Big Mac and a large fry and a
Mm-hmm.
Coke.
Mm-hmm.
And I
If you're
think that,
hungry, it's there. Yeah.
yeah, I'm hungry. It's there. It's Old Faithful like that. It'll
Mm-hmm.
always be
Yeah.
there. I'm never gonna say no. I just don't really want to say yes.
Right.
And that's kind of how I feel about fifth. I think fifth is a game that if people haven't played, they should.
Mm-hmm.
But like, let's be fair. Chances are, everyone and their grandma who will ever hear this has at least played one game of fifth edition.
Yeah, and so that's why I always refer to as, you know, D&D is the gateway into role playing. You can do it, you can have others, and there are certainly other games, but because of the popularity and especially the mainstream popularity now of it, it's the gateway into role playing.
Mm.
It should not be the end. It should be the beginning. It should be the foundation of how you learn how to role play, um, how you learn, because role playing is very important in other systems and mechanics that we're going to talk about in our podcast here. Um, there are games that focus more on role play than they do anything else. There's games that focus more on combat than they do on anything else. There's games that focus on neither of those things and have completely different, you know, mechanics and settings. That's okay. We're here for tabletop role playing games. Now, notice that I say role playing. They don't necessarily have to have role playing or combat in them to be tabletop games that are similar to board games and such that we're going to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, we'll try to cover the spectrum on everything.
Yeah.
And I think what's important is that in the future we're going to discuss a little bit more about individual games
Mm-hmm.
outside of fifth.
Mm-hmm.
But with fifth being, I think, the most obviously represented game,
Yeah.
you can't really have a podcast about RPGs and not at least talk about fifth edition
Or D&D.
or D&D in general.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that, like, part of the reason why we wanted to cover fifth for episode 1 is
Just to get it out of our system.
let's just get this out of the way.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But also because it gives us a good foundation for us to, like, discuss the things that we like. Why would you want to go away from fifth? even
Yeah.
if we were talking about other high fantasy games, what do those other high fantasy games bring to the table that maybe fifth doesn't, and might be a reason for you to want to even look into them?
I don't
So,
even want to compare other games to fifth edition.
if we don't have to, I would like to not. But
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
at the end of the day, I think there's it's one of those things where I think even though both of us don't want to, inevitably it's going to happen.
Hmm.
So I've just kind of assumed the position, if you will, on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, hey, if it happens, it happens. I'm not gonna sweat it. But once again, all the more reason to go over fifth from the beginning is
Hmm.
that it's that entry point, it's that gateway drug. It gets us all started. For a lot of people, that's as far as they go. But I'm gonna be real honest. If you go down that alley and you talk to that one guy over there with the weird accent who might be struggling to speak right, like, listen, he's got some great stuff that he's like. All right, it might have been made by some dude in a bathtub, but there's some good stuff in there, I promise. All right.
Yeah.
You might not like the way you feel after, but you're gonna love the way you feel during it. I promise. No,
Yeah,
all right,
that's very true depending on what you're playing.
all jokes aside, though,
Yeah.
fifth is a great game. I love fifth. I think you love fifth as well, but
Yeah.
it's
I
it's
enjoy it.
not. Yeah, it's like a high school crush, right? It was fun for a little while. I'm an adult now. The things I liked then are not the things I love now. I, you know, I loved milkshakes when I was in high school. Now I drink coffee. Right,
I'm
like
gonna upgrade that one. I'm gonna do something there. I liked milkshakes when I was in high school. Now I drink single malt scotch.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair
See.
enough. You know what? It's my day off. I've got a new single malt scotch. I think I'm gonna partake in after I go run some errands when we're done here.
Yeah. See.
I
Exactly my
think, you know
point.
what?